Welcome to this webinar on Chapter Awards Overview. My name is Eric Curiel and I'm the SACNAS National Chapters Manager here at SACNAS. So this year we changed the Chapter Awards application process, and that's why we're doing this video. So in this webinar, I basically wanted to talk about the new award structure, the application process, the timeline, have some time to answer questions. But before I jump into all of that, I kind of want to provide some reasons why we ended up changing the award process this year. And it really came down to three major things. Really, it's us trying to make the chapter awards more equitable, accessible, and simple to apply. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these things. So for equitability, we recognize that all chapters basically start off with different resources available to them. So in the long run, it doesn't really make sense to have just one chapter of the year award and then 5 or 6 other like outstanding chapter awards that we did in the past. So we wanted to recognize that. This year we wanted to have a larger emphasis on the impact that chapters had and not just necessarily like the number of activities that they did, the number of members that they had, which are all really important, but we really want to focus on the impact that chapters had. And then I briefly mentioned, so we're replacing the model that we've done in the last several years of essentially recognizing one chapter of the year and again, 5 or 6 other role models awards that were focused on particular type of activities that chapters did. This year we're essentially amplifying or bringing them all and recognizing them all to the same level. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, making them more equitable. Accessibility, because of these things that we talked about, we want to make these applications more accessible to all of our chapters. Again, not just the ones that necessarily have more resources, because again, that really varies depending on the institution size, the location of your institution, and like the funding available. So we didn't want to have that as a limiting factor for chapters to apply. And then the other major accessibility thing I wanted to talk about quickly was the award ceremony. So historically, the chapter award ceremony has been hosted at the SACNAS National Conference, which then meant that it was only available to registered attendees to watch these ceremony. But this year, we're actually going to be separating that and having its independent award ceremony from the national conference so that it's more accessible to essentially all of our members. So this year you won't have to be registered as a conference attendee to be able to experience and see the chapter awards ceremony. We will still at the national conference still have sessions for chapters dedicated to chapters and highlighting them, but we wanted to make sure that that we had this key session that's not necessarily just associated to the national conference. And then the third thing is simplicity. So again, if you've been a chapter for a while or just recently and you've looked at the applications in the past, they've been pretty cumbersome. So this year we decided to take a look and seeing how we can simplify the process. So essentially, we just essentially reduce, and I'll talk a little bit more throughout the presentation of how exactly we are reducing the information that we need for chapters to apply. The main one really just being you no longer have to submit separate activity reports. So in the past, if you wanted to apply for a chapter of the year, you essentially had to do a cover letter, letter of support from your advisor, and like 6 different activity reports, which was a lot of work, which we're moving to try to reduce that and make it easier for you to be accessible. So again, those are the 3 major reasons that I wanted to share of why there's a lot of changes to the chapter awards this year. Again, to make them more equitable, more accessible, and more easier to apply. So a little bit more of the structure this year. So I talked about not having one chapter of the year and multiple outstanding chapter awards depending on individual categories. What we'll be doing this year is just recognizing 7 total chapter awardees. 6 of them will be student chapters. And we'll be looking at basically every type of chapter here. So again, we encourage all of our chapters to apply for an award. We'll be looking at chapters that are focused on undergraduate students. So that can be chapters from based out of a community college or any other 4-year institution that again is focused on undergraduate students. We'll be looking at chapters that focus just on graduate students, and then also student chapters that are really focused on both undergraduate and graduate students. So again, we want to make these more accessible to all chapters. And then of course, we'll also now have a set award for our professional chapters as well. So going into a little bit more of the components of the application that you'll actually see, 3 major components: support letters, cover letter, and visual support material. So specifically the support letter, a change that we did this year is we require a minimum of 1 letter of support that should be from your chapter advisor, or at least one of your chapter advisors if you have multiple of them. But we're also opening up the opportunity to have up to 2 additional support letters. These 2 additional support letters could be from other professionals on or off campus, essentially just professionals that can vouch for the impact that your chapter has had. An example could be is if a professional on your campus could be like a faculty person that maybe works closely with your chapter, as maybe they were like a student or a speaker for your sessions, and just really was impressed by the impact that your chapter has. It could be anybody off campus. So for example, if you did any outreach to like K-12 schools or any other outreach off campus with any part of your community, and like if there's a professional that really wants to vouch for your chapter, this year now they do have the opportunity to be able to submit those letter of supports in addition to that one that's already required from your chapter advisor. So again, a minimum of 1 letter, and optional, you have the opportunity to do up to 2. And each of those support letters should be limited to just 1 page. I know a lot of these professionals that you work with probably have a lot of great things to talk about you, but kind of going in line with trying to keep the process simplified, and again, not having a super big burden on your chapters, we put a limit of just 1 page per support letter. Information that your support letter should include, right? So again, this year we kind of want to put more guidance to really simplify this process and make this easier for your support writer or your letter writers to be able to do in their letters. So key things that they should address in their letter is: how do they know the chapter? Again, what's the impact of the chapter, which is the big emphasis here? Why do they think that your chapter deserves an award? And also, how has your chapter work aligned with the SACNAS mission? So we hope with these key talking points, it will make it easier for the professionals that you identify to write you letters of support to be able to make that process for them easier as well. For the cover letter really is going to be the bulk of the work for the students to work on, or just your chapter members in general. This is where you want to clearly summarize the impact of your chapter. And here's where we want to ask you to really focus on 2 major components: is the chapter activities that you've done, and then the chapter development. And I'll provide examples of these in the next slide. of what things you can include to kind of cover the chapter activities and chapter development. But I really want to emphasize here again, to try to make this process easier for chapters, we want to set a limit of just a 2-page cover letter max. Again, we know you probably have a lot of exciting and excellent work to do, but we want to, again, try to help you and make these easier for you to apply. So we're setting a 2-page limit. So some examples or things to consider when you're looking at your chapter activities and chapter development is, what type of professional development did you offer for your members? What type of activities did you do to really enhance the connection and networking of your chapter members, right? So like really, how did you really work on building that familia or community within your chapter? And then the third major thing to consider is, again, local outreach. For this local outreach, it could be outreach within your campus. So not necessarily just the outreach that you did within your chapter, but like across different departments, across different student resources groups, really just getting your name out there as a chapter and as an additional resource for chapters on campus. Or it could just be within your general local community, right? Within your city or region, depending on how large of a place that you're in. But this could again be like the K-12 activities that you potentially do, or just any other local outreach that you have in your community. With these activities, I know some chapters are going to be stronger in some areas versus others. So really think carefully of like what you feel that your chapter again had the strongest impact in, and really emphasize in those activities when you're writing your letters, your cover letter, because again, we want to limit this to just 2 pages. So think really strongly of like which activities that you feel strongly impacted. And again, it doesn't have to be like which was the activity that you had the most attendees or you had the most members. Again, we want to focus on the impact part. Examples of chapter development is membership recruitment and retention, right? So how did you work on campus to increase your membership? Whether it was with outreach activities that you did with, again, other departments, other student resource groups, what type of activities? Again, a lot of these kind of go hand in hand with each other, right? So if you have those activities, that's going to really help you retain the members that you have. If you had opportunities for fundraising, this is where you would address those. And then chapter sustainability is really focused on the type of things that you did to really help create your chapter to be really strong year after year, right? So not just thinking within one academic year, but thinking about, okay, how are we going to set up our elections? How are we going to train our officers from one year to the next? How are we maintaining our records and our documents so that when the next cohort of chapter officers takes place, they'll have a place where they can reference and start with to then evolve the programming for the next year and not just feel like they have to start from scratch essentially every year. So this is where you would also address some of that information of how you're maintaining those records and how you're working with your advisor as well to really just try to help that transition period from one year to the next. And then the third major component to the applications is the visual support material. This is basically any information that really supplements or supports the information that you've written in your cover letter. So this can either be just presentation slides, which is really the most common thing that we've get in the past, or it could be a very short video that you compile. Again, with the video, we ask if you do want to do a video to try to limit it to 2 minutes, because I know that's a lot of work to edit the videos. So if you do go that route, we kind of don't want you to spend like an excessive amount of time on it. Because again, we want to focus on simplicity here. So some examples that you can submit in this visual support materials. It could be photos of your activities. It could be member quotes if they feel super impacted and you just have like a quote that they either shared during a meeting or on social media post that you see that was super impactful, like you can share that. Some chapters typically share like screenshots of like agendas that they have. Typically, like it's easy if they shared them on social media, like you can just grab screenshots from there. Or evaluation reports if you collect any data from your membership or just results from any particular activities that you did that you wanted to share. This is another great opportunity to do so. So yeah, just to summarize, the application will have three major components. It'll have the support letter, the cover letter, and the visual support materials. Again, if you're familiar with our previous process, you no longer have to do a bunch of additional activity reports for each different type of category that we've had in the past, because we want to make this a lot more simpler, so that we encourage a lot more chapters to apply regardless of what their resources were this year. So timeline, I'll share a little bit of timeline of kind of what's happening now. So the applications should be available next week. I think we're working on updating our webpage, but the application should be live next week. It's essentially going to have the same information I just talked about here, which will be information of those three components. All of those will be attachments that you just upload to the application. So you'll have a month to submit that. You'll have up to September 3rd. We are expecting to have the applications then reviewed and selected, ideally by mid-September, so that by the end of September, you would, like the chapter awardees would be notified. And then we're planning to do our chapter award ceremony online, ideally by the end of September or early October, definitely before the national conference, because again, we'll be doing that as a separate event so that it's more accessible to all of your members to really just have them available to present if your chapter gets awarded, and also to have your other chapter members be able to be part of that recognition and also be available to watch. And again, we will still at the national conference have activities specific to chapters. We will still be highlighting our awardees at the national conference, but we wanted to make sure that the ceremony itself is more accessible to all of our chapter members and not just those that are attendees for the conference. So at this point, I know that's a lot of information. I want to make sure that folks that are on this webinar have an opportunity to ask questions. So we'll transition. If you do have a question, please submit it in the Q&A feature. I think, yeah, that's the last slide that I have. Don't see any questions here. But yeah, just I know some folks joined a little bit later after we started, so I'll just kind of do another quick little recap. Major reason why we changed the chapter application process this year was to try to make them more equitable, accessible, and simple to apply. The three major components this year is going to be a letter of support, at least one from your advisor. Like if that's all that you can get, like that's totally fine. Just that one letter of support from your advisor. But now we also have the opportunity to have additional up to 2 letters of recommendation from other professionals. The cover letters essentially where you add the information about your activities and your chapter development. Again, that would be limited to 2 pages. And then that visual support material documents. So those are your three major components. The application again should be opening up next week, so the first week of August, and then it'll be available until the end of or September 3rd. So you'll have a month to submit. Our goal is to have the applications reviewed and identify the awardees by middle of September, and then by the end of September do award ceremony. So I do have a question asking, how will you consider the applications considering how COVID impacted chapter activities? So it's a great question. And that was part of the process of us really wanting to reevaluate chapter awards this year and seeing how we can, again, make them more simpler for chapters to be able to apply and be recognized. Again, this year, what we want to focus on is the impact of the activities that you did, right? So we're not asking for like a minimum of activities that you did. Like we really want to focus on whatever activities that you did, we just want to know like what was the impact of it, right? So again, not going to focus too much heavily on like, oh, awarding the chapter with the most activities and the most members. We want to focus on the impact because we recognize that, especially with COVID this year, it was a lot more difficult for chapters to be able to host as many activities as they would have liked. So I hope that answers that question. I think there's another question. What is the evaluation criteria? Are all the components valued equally? How are you considering the impact of COVID on outreach opportunities? And a lot of spaces have opened up, but still remain restrictions. Yeah, great question. So again, we really want to focus on the impact this year. In that cover letter, ideally, we'll be looking at hoping for chapters to really address those key points that we mentioned, right? So like the impact that your professional development had, how you connected and had networking available for your chapters, and then the local outreach. Obviously, if you didn't have that, like it's totally fine. We definitely recognize that. So we will have flexibility on how we select our awardees. Again, instead of just doing one chapter of the year this year and then individuals for particular categories, we want to look at the entire work that all of our chapters do. And we will basically review them based on different categories, right? So we'll be looking at the graduate students separately, like we understand that a lot of the graduates student chapters have more resources than, for example, say like the community college students. So we'll be kind of looking at what the resources are available for each chapters, and again, how they use those resources to make the greatest impact and not just looking at straight numbers of total activities and total members. Let's see if there's any other questions on here. Okay, I don't see any other questions. For those of you that are live on this webinar, I can send you this presentation because I know the application is not live yet on the website as of today, but it should be next week. But I can send you these, I'll email you the slides, which essentially will be the same information that's on the application, because once you submit the applications, you'll essentially just submit those 3 components as attachments. So I'll make sure to share those with you. And as you're kind of working with your chapter and looking at this this information, please feel free to ask me any questions that you have throughout the process. I'll be available to try to help you in any way that I can, to try to address any concerns you may have. But really this year, we really are hoping to get a lot more chapters to apply, regardless of the resources that you have to begin with. We just don't want chapters to feel like because they maybe only did a limited number of activities that they aren't worthy of applying for a chapter award application. So again, we encourage all of our chapters to definitely consider applying, and we're going to be super flexible as far as like evaluating the chapters and just try to make it as equitable as possible so that we can try to recognize all types of chapters, because just the large range of chapters, obviously not just one blanket set of requirements is going to work, right? Because you are all starting from different resources. So we want to definitely recognize that as we're awarding these processes. So I don't think I see any additional questions. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for taking time to be on this webinar. Again, for those of you who joined live, I will email you the slides that I just presented here so that you have that information that you can start working with your chapters. And for everybody else, that all this information should be updated on the website, on our chapters website, definitely on next week, which is the first week of August. So with that being said, thank you again for joining us. And I hope you have a great day.